Hi, folks. Hope you are okay. Making a couple of short videos tonight. Um, so we're going to look at manuscripts, earliest manuscripts, and hope this is a blessing to you. And we're going to make a few short videos tonight. So this is on a site called Biblical Archaeology Reports. I've also checked it with another site, Michael Kruger. So I've checked some of the things that have been said. Um, Of all the books of the New Testament were written within the lifetime of the death of Jesus. All of the books of the New Testament were written within a lifetime of the death of Jesus of Nazareth. Not so the so-called other Gospels, which were pseudo-graphical Gnostic works written 100 to 300 years later. To date, we have over 5,800 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, with an astounding 2.6 million pages. 2.6 million pages. Um, of biblical text. While some of these manuscripts are small and fragmentary, the average size of the New Testament manuscript is 450 pages. Add to this the ancient manuscripts in Latin, Coptic, Syriac, Armenian, which numbers in the tens of thousands, and you realize there is an embarrassment of riches which it comes to New Testament manuscripts. No other ancient text can compare with the New Testament when it comes to the sheer volume of manuscripts, nor when we consider how close the earlier manuscripts are to the originals. So, what are the earliest New Testament manuscripts? Here's one. Housed in the Sackler Library Papyrology Room at the University of Oxford, England, are two of the earliest New Testament manuscripts. P90 in Poxy 3523 is a small fragment of papyri with portions of the Gospel of John in chapter 18, verse 36 to chapter 19, verse 7. On both sides in Greek, it has been dated paleographically to the 2nd century AD. This text is part of the Incus Papyri, a group of manuscripts discovered in the ancient garbage dump in Egypt. Papyri 104 is a 2nd century papyri fragment that contains Matthew 21, verse 34-37 on the front and traces of verse 43-45 on the back. This manuscript is 6.35 centimeters by 9.5 cm in size. Now, the writer says the scholars date the writings of Matthew's Gospel to the late 50s or early 60s. I would say some scholars do. Many scholars go later than that, but I would agree that it's in the 50s and 60s. This is due in part to a comment by the church father Irenaeus that Matthew also issued a written gospel among the Hebrews in their own dialect, while Peter and Paul were preaching at Rome, laying the foundation of the church. John's Gospel is dated to the late 1st century, after the composition of the other Gospels. Again, Irenaeus, writing near the end of the 2nd century, states, After John, the disciples of the Lord, who also had leaned upon his breast, did himself publish a Gospel during his residence at Ephesus in Asia. Early church history records that John lived the final years of his life in Ephesus, dying as an old man, sometimes near the end of the 1st century. This means that these two manuscripts date to within 100 and 150 years of the original autograph. For comparison, Pliny the Elder wrote his encyclopedia, Natural History, in the 1st century, and the early manuscript we have is from the 5th century, a gap of 400 years. Papyri, page 98, Papyri, P98, sorry. It's a manuscript fragment that contains verses from the first chapter of the book of Revelation. It was copied AD 100 to 200 likely in Egypt. The manuscript was first published by Guy Wagner in 1971, who dated it to the 2nd century. He did not recognize that it was a biblical text, however, and it wasn't until 20 years later that Dieter Hagedorn identified it as coming from Revelation 1:13-20. The manuscript is in the collection of Le Francis de or in Tel, in Cairo, Egypt. In about AD 185, Irenaeus wrote that the book of Revelation was composed almost in our day towards the end of Domitian's reign. Domitian reigned from AD 81 to 96, which is one of the reasons many scholars believe the book of Revelation was written by the Apostle John sometime in 90s. Thus, P98 was likely copied within about 100 years of the original text. There is the papyri of that text. Boy, it's hot. It's hot in Ghana. Papyrus 52, there's the section, there it is, as we can see. Anybody who's come online. So, Papyrus 52, the earliest and most famous Greek New Testament manuscript, Ryland's Papyrus P52, currently on display at the John Rylands University Library in Manchester, UK. It was purchased in 1920 by Bernard Grenfell of the Egyptian Antiquities Market. However, it wasn't really discovered until 1934 when it was translated by C.H. Roberts. Three of the leading papyrologists in Europe to whose Roberts sent the photos of the fragment is dated from AD 100 to 150, although most scholars today would use a wider date range of the 2nd century. In general, P52 comes from a codex, i.e. book form, not a scroll, and contains parts of 7 lines from John 18, verse 31 to 33 on the front and parts of 7 lines from verse 37-38 on the back. So it says, from the Greek, the Jews, for us, it is not permitted to kill anyone, so that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying what kind of death he was going to die. Entered therefore again into the Praetorian Pilate, and summoned Jesus, and said to him, Thou art the king of the Jews. King I am, for this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, so that I would testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears of me my voice, said to him. Pilate, what is truth? And this having said, again he went unto the Jews, and said to him, I find not one fault in him. As mentioned above, the Apostle John likely wrote his Gospel sometime late in the 1st century. This means that P52, the earliest New Testament manuscript, was likely copied within 100 years or so of the original. Moreover, since the manuscript was discovered in Egypt, a significant distance away from Ephesus, where the Gospel was originally written, we can see that the text of the Bible was being copied and widely circulated around the 2nd century. Other possible 2nd century manuscripts. I like the fact that he said possible because there are debates with manuscripts on dates. But I do think there is a skepticism within scholars, and they do tend to date things later rather than earlier, which I think is a shame because there's a lot of prejudice in the dating system against the New Testament. In addition to the above 4 manuscripts, which were copied sometimes between AD 100 to 200, there are other group of manuscripts that may date to the 2nd century as well, usually listed as dating from 2nd to 3rd centuries. These are led by recently published Papyrus 137, the manuscript formerly known as 1st century Mark. After 6 years of rumors, it was finally published in 2018 by Oxford papyrologist Daniel Colomo and Dirk Obink, who dated it paleographically to AD 150 to 250. While not the 1st century manuscript that some were anticipating, it's nonetheless the earliest copy of the Gospel of Mark in existence. According to the database maintained by the Center of the Study of New Testament Manuscripts, www.csntm.org, there are 6 other manuscripts that are also dated to 2nd to 3rd century. You have P46, which has, you have P32, which has Titus. It's in Greek language, 2nd to 3rd century. You have Papyrus P46, which has Romans 1 and 2, Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Thessalonians, Hebrews, 2 to 3rd century. You have Papyri P66, John Gospel, Greek, 2 to 2nd century. Papyri P77, Gospel of Matthew, Greek, 2nd to 3rd century. Papyri P103, Gospel of Matthew, Greek, 2nd to 3rd century. And Majuscule GA0189, Acts of the Apostles, Greek, 2nd to 3rd century. This brings the total number of possible second century New Testament manuscripts to 11. Kruger would say 12. These 11 manuscripts, and in particular the 4 that are securely dated to the second century, are important links in the chain connecting the Bible we read to the origin of the New Testament. So those are some notes there that you can look at. So published by Brian Windle. Okay, so there's a helpful article there. So I think it'll be Syriac. I think these texts, but I could be wrong. Don't hold me to that. Okay. So we're going to just discuss that in a minute. I think so. What's the beef there? What's the main thing to take from that? It tells you that. Just give me a second. I'm just doing something here. I want to change the banner. So God bless you. Yeah. I think the main thing to take away is that when you compare it to ancient literature like the Iliad, for example, it's like hundreds and hundreds of years before we even get a scrap of a copy. But here, we're not talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. We're getting scraps of copies early on in the history of the copying of the text. You got to also think that Christianity for the first 300 years, it's not like Islam. Islam had an army. The Muslims had armies protecting their various cities and towns, whereas the Christians, they didn't have armies those first 300 years. Like Domitian give a public statement that he would have all the Christian books burnt. So there was a lot of persecution. So we shouldn't expect, like in the first 100 years, vast amounts of literature to be found. But what we do found is better even than secular writings for copies, And it would be interesting. I'm just going to, just for argument's sake, I want to find out Gnostic Gospel manuscripts dates. Let's see. Right, interesting, yeah. About the dating of the manuscripts themselves, there was little debate. Examination of the debatable papyrus used to thicken the leather bindings and of the Coptic script placed them AD 350 to 400. So scholars sharply disagree about the dating of the original text of the Gnostics, but there's a general consensus of some that the Gnostic manuscripts, some of the manuscripts are from 350 to 400. So that's interesting. So in the Nag Hammadi library, yeah. But I would say there's a vast amount of literature on the Gnostic Gospels. And I think that that vast amount of Gnostic literature, they're quoting, I never get tired of saying this, they're quoting the four Gospels in these Gnostic Gospels. So it's interesting that these are dated to, that the actual manuscripts are very often dated to 350 to 450, which would strengthen the, which would strengthen the case, which would strengthen the case that the Gospels are early, the four Gospels are early history. Sorry about that. So there we are. So that's some about the manuscripts, some of the earliest manuscripts that we have of the Gospels. I hope that's of interest to you, and I'm going to do some more videos tonight, so that's just one video that I'm doing. So God bless you. I'm going to do some more now. I'm going to go to the next video that I'm doing. So God bless you, and take care now.